What is impact?
Impact refers to a situation where a test does have an impact on learning and teaching. And in fact, not just on learning and teaching, as well as on the whole society. People sometimes say that the uses of tests are not just limited to what happens in schools, but also what happens in society as a whole. So impact actually, some people call it impact, some people call it washback, other people call it backwash, some people refer to it as consequences. It's really not clear what the exact term is, but it refers generally to some effect that tests have.
Why do tests have impact?
That's a very interesting question, because tests have impact because tests are very powerful tools in the society. Tests use all kinds of devices which are very powerful in many ways. Tests use the language of numbers. Tests are very authoritative because they tell us what will happen to us, what will be our future at times. In fact, tests are so detrimental that they can really tell people that either they will live or die. Either they'll be successful or they'll be failures. Either they'll get into certain programs or they won't. Either they'll be accepted to places where they want to be or they'll be rejected. So the power of tests is so big, which means that therefore they have an impact because people tend to comply with the demands of tests. So if a test says that one has to learn a certain topic, and even if you don't think it's an important topic, you will go ahead and learn the topic just so you will be able to pass a test, because you know that the consequences of passing a test are that you'll enter a certain program, you'll be able to achieve something that you really wanted to achieve. While if you don't, you won't get there, which is going to be very sad for you. So I think impact exists mostly because tests are very, very powerful for most human beings, and not just for individuals. It's sometimes for programs, for schools, for institutions. The effect of tests is so big that impact is there because people will comply with the needs and the demands of tests.
What kinds of impact are there?
Okay, that's a good question, because oftentimes people think that just the fact that there is a test, it will have an impact and people will right away comply with the test. Although research shows that it's not always so. Some tests will have no impact whatsoever. If it's a test in a language that's not very important, people will not change their behavior to comply with the demands of the test. If the test is not very important, if the test is not something that actually will result in something which is high stake, people will not comply. So what we're saying is that impact depends on a variety of factors. It depends on, as I said, the importance of the test. It depends in language testing on the kind of language that we use. And it depends also on how the information is going to be used. So impact at times can be there can be lots of impact, but at other times there can be no impact at all. And in fact, people are researching this topic because they want to know when does a test have an impact and when it doesn't. I think the important thing to say about impact is not just that there is impact, but how people, or especially bureaucrats or people in government, are using it. They make an assumption oftentimes that if there will be a test, and people will change their behavior, and therefore they introduce tests just to make people change their behavior. So oftentimes you'll see a situation where something had not been taught very well in school, and some people in the Ministry of Education, or even in the school, or even in the classroom, the teacher will say, oh, this topic hasn't been studied, people don't really know it. Let's create a situation whereby I will give a test and you will be forced to study. That means there will be an impact. So they're building on impact, they're counting on impact in their policy. So you see oftentimes situations where government agencies will introduce tests just to create an impact. But what they don't realize is that although they assume that there is always impact, it's not necessarily so. Sometimes there will be some impact, sometimes there won't be at all. So what we're trying to do is to understand when there is an impact, when there is no impact, what are some of the factors that are affecting impact. And I think many of the language testers are trying to warn people who introduce tests just for the sake of impact to be cautious about this behavior, because impact is not always such an automatic thing. It doesn't happen automatically. So if you want to create an impact, it's very important to understand when it occurs and when it doesn't occur. And some of the testers are very, very critical about how tests are being used, because instead of using tests for finding out how well people know, they become an arm for policy, for people to decide, let's introduce a test, as I said, just so something will happen. So impact is there, and maybe impact can be good at times, but at times we have to really be careful about the use of impact, because it's not always positive. Another thing that I'd like to mention is that while we think that impact is always positive, it's not always positive. Some people say that good tests have good impact, bad tests have bad impact, and even that is not necessarily so. Sometimes you can have a very good test and still the impact is very negative, because it depends what people do to prepare for the test, and vice versa. So impact exists, but we still know very little about it, but it's certainly one of the major areas of research for language testers in this day and age. And it's also contextualizing language testing, not within the framework of language testing, but also within the general framework of education or language learning in general.
Thank you very much.